Hi, folks. Welcome to Experts in Isolation, episode 3, with me, Dr. Gareth. This is where we try and gain some insight from people who've lived and worked, or potentially are researching extreme, isolated, and restricted environments, so that we can gain some insight from them in terms of things that might help us to all cope with the current lockdown that we're facing. This week, I'm very fortunate to be joined by Dr. Jennifer Pickett, who is currently a personality researcher working in Belgium, but has previously lived and worked in the wilds of Alaska, including captaining her own fishing vessel. So, therefore, she has a pretty unique take on living and working in these types of environments that may well help us in the current lockdown scenario. Here we go.
So, Jen, if we could just start by you giving us a bit of an idea about what your previous experiences of living in confined spaces or working in extreme and confined environments have been.
Okay, yeah. Well, in addition to now, because I live by myself, and so we've been on lockdown here almost a month, and so I think I've seen one person previous to that. I mean, of course, I go out and stuff, but so face-to-face contact it's been like a month, but yeah, I lived in Alaska for a long time, which in itself is an isolated place. I lived in a remote village, Cordova. You can only get there by boat or by plane. So there was one small road once you get there, but there's nowhere to go. And I worked on fishing boats a lot throughout Southeast and in the Western Alaska. And so not only am I in a remote state to begin with, and then these fishing areas are even more remote, and then being on a boat is even more remote than that. And sometimes it depends on the fishery. I would be out for a minimum of 1 or 2 days, up to, I don't know, 6 weeks, or maybe I think the longest was 2 months or something. So it just depends on the fishery. And then also I worked in northern Alaska on the North Slope, in the oil fields, which is a remote areas as well. It's you can only get there if you are employed by the oil fields. I've done that twice. Once in April, which was still full on winter, and at the camp there, and then another time in the summer, again on a boat. So there it's a different remote. I mean, because you're remote and confined, but there's a lot more people around. However, you can't really leave, and so your bubble has been expanded bigger than a boat, but it's still a bubble for sure. And other than that, I guess a couple expeditions, hiking through the Talkeetna Range in Alaska. There was one 150 miles, which is like 260 kilometers. That was a course that I did in my bachelor's, and I did it twice. And there were, I don't know, I think 9 of us once, and maybe 11 the second time. And that was 3 weeks. We only saw each other, and we got food dropped twice. The pilot take out our garbage, so we saw him twice, I think. But other than that, it was just moose and bears and lots of caribou and yeah. So yeah, I'm sailing a little bit. So I think the 3 months or maybe so was the longest I've been on a sailboat. So I guess several times.
Sure, and well, really varied experiences there, I guess, in terms of both on land and on or in the sea.
Yeah.
And I guess just for maybe people who are unfamiliar with Alaska and kind of the environment up there, what's it like? How cold does it get? What sort of environment are you kind of working and living in while you're there?
Yeah, to start, Alaska is huge. It's like one size the continental U.S. So it's really big. And I think if you imposed Alaska on Europe, it would go from like Poland to Spain and even more so. I mean, and then the chain would go out even the ocean chain even further. So it's a really big area. And the weather varies. I mean, on the in the coast and on the water, it's a bit more of a maritime climate, which means it's cold and wet. But cold is in, I don't know, Now I'm thinking of Fahrenheit. In the summers, it's maybe like 10, I guess, or 12. I mean, it could be up to 17, or it depends on where you are. But then if you get into the interior and Fairbanks in the summer, it can go to be like 30 or more. So really, it's really variant. In the interior, it's dry and temperate, and then the coast is kind of a maritime climate. It's wet and cold. And then the North Slope, even though I was there in April, it was 40 below, and more so. So that was quite not very pleasant, but you could eat a lot of cheesecake.
Yeah. And I suppose, like, maybe if we start with the fishing, what sort of drew you to that in the first place, and how did you kind of end up there, if you like?
Yeah. Ad in the school paper actually is how I got into fishing. Because originally I'm from Ohio, and I was going to Ohio State, and yeah, saw a little advertisement in the Ohio Lantern there to Ohio State Lantern to work in a cannery in Alaska. And so I took my tuition money and bought a plane ticket, and ended up, my first summer that wasn't the case, but I don't know, once I discovered that it existed, it just kind of gnawed at me to go experience it. And the second summer I went back to Alaska and was in a fishing village, and was boat sitting for a guy. So I was in the harbor there, and the fisherman across the way needed a deckhand for halibut, and I jumped at the chance. And then just one fishing job led to another, and next thing you know, you're on different boats and going to different fisheries in different parts of the state. I did that for a while, and then I bought my own boat. I fished alone for 5 years off the Copper River in the Gulf of Alaska, and then kind of started going back to school, and got out of the fishery in a little bit, and got a bachelor's in outdoor studies, which is the study of human behavior in the out of doors. So it's kind of a outdoor play, outdoor recreation kind of a degree. And then a master's in psychology, and then I went back to the fishing world, and did that for a little bit longer, and then came to Europe and just finished my PhD in work in organizational psychology. So it's kind of been a cycle of fishing and studying psychology. But yeah, so what drew me to it was the adventure and the mystery of it, I guess, and the romance. Although once you get on a boat, you know it's not all that romantic at all usually. but the mystery of it all, I think, is what I really enjoy. I mean, every day is different. You never know what's really gonna happen. I mean, the weather can change, and the fisheries change. You know, the tide can change. So it's just really sort of kind of moment to moment, you know, just living in the now, really, and that part I really enjoy.
Yeah.
And the nature.
Yeah. So you kind of highlighted some of the positive aspects then, and what initially drew you to it in the first place. I wonder also, what sort of challenges do you face kind of when you're out on the sea for, you know, an extended period of time?
Yeah. A lot. Well, there's, you know, the work is hard and arduous and cold and wet, and you don't get much days off, and it's very physical. So there's that. And if you're not catching any fish and not making any money, that's a bit of a drag too. But I think one of the bigger challenges actually is the personalities that you're working with. Because often, you know, the skipper's doing the hiring, and he or she hires by skill, not by values or matches and personalities. And there's always one, you know, that it's really makes things difficult. So, for example, in Bristol Bay, that fishery is maybe about 6 weeks long, and there's 5 people on a 32-foot boat, which is, I think, 8.5 meters. So that gets really small really quick.
Yeah.
And tempers kind of flare after a while. So that gets challenging. But you just have to kind of endure, because your main job is to catch fish and pick them out of the net, and put your personal differences aside, and try to remember your main goal of catching fish and making money.
Yeah, I suppose that picks up on something to an extent we're all experiencing, and something we picked up on with Nathan last week around kind of conflict and the fact that you're in a confined space with potentially other people, although like yourself, you not got other people around there, but there'll be a lot of people who maybe are encountering living in close quarters for a much more extended period of time than they may be used to. So were there any tips you kind of picked up for addressing that conflict, or anything you found useful?
Yeah. The fact that personal space isn't always physical, I mean, there is a physical personal space, but if you don't have that as an option, then it's kind of a, I don't know, I guess a mental personal space where you can maybe sit next to somebody, but just, do your own thing, not pester them, kind of give each other a little bit of space thing, and just communicating a lot, and trying to, I don't know, be polite about things.
Sure.
It's easy, but yeah, and acceptance and tolerance of each other, and the fact that we're in the situation, none of us chose to be there. I think that's the biggest difference that I see now is people who work in these extreme environments are typically choose that, their personalities are maybe suited towards that. It's easier to see the bigger picture when you're out there by choice, so it's easier to overlook personality clashes, if like I mentioned, you're just out there trying to make money and catch fish, but here none of us are really here by choice. But again, the bigger picture though is to not spread the virus, right? So I guess if we kind of keep an eye on the bigger picture, that might help as well.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I suppose in terms of something else that keeps cropping up, I guess, is this notion of an extended period of time, which we find ourselves in this situation. We're not quite sure for how long. And I think based on some of the conversations that we maybe had previously when we met in Manchester, and the stuff you presented, that is perhaps picked up on in terms of the fisheries, and the idea that maybe you have a rough window of time that you're expecting to be out there, but maybe that could be longer or shorter depending. And I just wonder, was there anything, firstly, to what extent that kind of cropped up, and was there anything you drew from that might help us through the current scenario?
Yeah, sometimes you don't know exactly, when you'll be going home. I mean, I don't remember what year it was, but fishing herring out of Togiak, which is out in Bristol Bay. It's it took us like a week just to run the boat out there one way, and you never know how long the fishery is going to last. And so we were expected to be home in 3 weeks, and 6 weeks later we were still sitting in Togiak. So that's hard. I mean, because I had an idea of when I was going to be back, and also with fishing, you kind of put your other life on hold, while you're out in the middle of nowhere. So like bills are stacking up and stuff like that, but there's nothing you can do about that. But so we did experience that, and that is hard. Yeah, I don't know. I guess what's what's coming to mind now is when I used to practice yoga on a more regular basis. We'd be in this really hard pose, and this yoga instructor would be like, "Okay, 5 more seconds," and then she would make us hold it for 10. Because
yeah,
sadistic. But I guess just practicing that expectations are, it's something to keep in check. So you have an expectation that you're going to hold this pose for 5 seconds, and then it's held for 10, and see what that brings up for you. Or you have an expectation that, this is going to last for 3 weeks, but it's end up being 6. I mean, just, I guess, managing expectations, and it's going to be more difficult for people, some people than others. I study personality as well, and one of the personality traits that we look at is openness. And people who are high in openness are open, a variety of things, the unknown and uncertainty and creativity, and things changing on a regular basis. And people who are low in openness like things very scheduled and maintain that schedule. And yeah, so I think that it kind of depends on your personality, how well you handle the unknown, I guess.
Sure. And you mentioned a little bit about your research there. And is there anything we can kind of draw from that in terms of the work you've done in regards to personality, or more widely, that might be helpful?
Yeah, I think so. I can send you a link. There's a free open source personality quiz you can take that's based off the Big Five, and it will give you so 5 different personality traits and tell you on the spectrum where you are. And I think that's helpful just to know, because being locked down, and it depends on your situation. But for me, I'm an introvert, so being here by myself is not that bad. That's sort of my natural personality tendency. But if I were extroverted here by myself, it would be really, really difficult, because extroverted people want to be more social and engaging. And the other could be true. If you're in a house with 3 or 4 other people and you're an introvert, then that's going to be a little bit more difficult to handle. So so I'll be sure to send you that link, and people can take this little personality quiz and kind of find out what they are. And because I think once you can name something, then it helps you find a coping strategy for it.
Yeah, and I guess kind of having that self-awareness as well is really
Yeah.
important in these circumstances. We'll definitely put that in the description to the video, so thanks for that, Jen. I noticed as well, I enjoyed reading your blog yesterday, but that had some excellent tips, I thought, in terms of all sorts of things, really. You went into even sort of planning food and that type of thing, which I think maybe is something you've perhaps drawn on from your expedition kind of experience, and maybe the fisheries more widely as well.
Yeah, and any of these expeditions or even fishing trips, depends on where we go. We kind of have to bring our own food with us. So for me, I was a little flummoxed as to what to buy, as you read in the blog, because most of the things that you stock up on are most of the things I don't eat on a regular basis. So I had to sort of play with that a little bit. But I'm working on another blog that would make it more relevant. I'm not sure, actually, the topic I want to discuss. I'm a little bit thinking about discussing grief, because that's one thing that's we're all going through in different phases and different stages, and that's not talked about so much. But I might also talk about the isolation too, of having been under lockdown for a month already, and here in Belgium it's well, officially it's till the 19th, but it's pretty sure it's going to be extended to maybe another month at least. So we'll see.
Yeah. And something I also picked up on from your blog was around this idea of perspective taking as well, maybe in the context of previous generations. I don't know if you want to talk to that a little bit as well.
Every generation has been, either called to war, or the Great Depression, or something like that has tested, the people collectively, and our generation now is being tested, but more on a global level, I think. So it will be interesting to see how everything comes out. But I think people have really come around to sort of stepping up to the challenge. It seems, you didn't see it so much in the beginning, because it was so different for every country. Everybody was at different phases of locking down, and some countries are still more or less at different phases. But at least here in Belgium, people are really seeming to take it seriously, and realize that it's a small sacrifice for the greater good, and it's not a personal attack on freedoms. I mean, of course, we have lost some freedoms, but it's not like the intention was to take our freedoms away. I mean, the intention is to save lives.
So there we have it, folks. Some great tips and insight from Jen, particularly picking up on things like being able to find your own personal space, even if that's just a mental rather than physical personal space, given the confined environments that we might be living in at the moment. Also picking up on the idea of thinking about the broader perspective, and maybe the common goal that we're all trying to work towards in terms of keeping people safe and indeed saving lives. And then also this idea of being able to manage your expectations and picking up on that in particular in regards to the uncertain amount of time that we're going to be going through the lockdown for in the current scenario we find ourselves in. The other thing that I think is also really important to pick up on is this idea of personality and that self-awareness of one's personality potentially being useful in terms of understanding how we might cope with certain aspects of the lockdown slightly better or slightly worse than others. So we've added the link to the personality test in the description to the video below. Another thing to just point out as well and promote is that Jen was involved in a webinar with a group of Spanish scientists working in Belgium, where they looked at various aspects of well-being in relation to the COVID crisis. So again, some really interesting insight and tips for people in terms of being able to adapt to and cope with the current crisis that we're going through. So again, that link to the webinar and the recording of the webinar is in the description to this video. As always, hope you found this useful and interesting. Stay well and stay safe, everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye.